and welcome back to Prickly Pear Primas 2.0, Season 2? What are we calling it, Savanah?
I think we're calling it Season 2.
Season 2. New look, new vibe, more traditional podcast formatting, I would say. And we're talking about something that we love.
What is that we're talking about today, Ryan?
We're talking about the acclaimed and infamous YA book and film, Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. Oh my goodness, directed by Catherine
Hardwicke.
Until recently, the number one highest grossing female director of all time.
Before we get into all of Twilight, I think we should just address that we are in fact back. There are some changes, as Ryan said. We are doing kind of more of a traditional podcast format now, but we are still on YouTube with some cool new looks and animations. So if you're visually seeing us right now, you'll be getting to experience that. We're also going to be transitioning to having episodes bi-weekly instead of weekly, just so that way Ryan and I can put some more time into the episodes that we're doing and just fit it into our lives a little bit easier. And we're very excited for spooky season next month. So if you have any ideas for things you'd like us to cover in spooky season, please let us know.
Do we even need to go over Twilight? Like, do we even need to give a background? It's just, I don't even know who would not know what Twilight is and would be listening to us right now.
Yeah, I don't think we need to necessarily give a summary. If you have not seen it, I think this would just be us encouraging you to go watch it at this point. And if you have happened to not see it, definitely be wary of spoilers at this point for the entire franchise, I would say. But I think we should go through a little bit of background on it, just because some people probably don't know all the details of like production and stuff. So Twilight, the movie, came out in 2008. Twilight, the book, written by Stephenie Meyer, came out in 2005. Fun fact that I just still think is such a strange coincidence how Stephenie Meyer is from Arizona, where we are. Actually, I don't know if she's originally from Arizona, but she resides in Arizona with her family. That's just a tangent, though. But so Twilight, the movie, did you have a comment on that, Ryan? You made
just
a face.
in Scottsdale, you know.
No,
like
I think it's Fountain Hills that she lives in.
I think she maybe it's Diana Gabaldon, another famous romance writer who lives in Scottsdale.
Yeah. Anyways, so Twilight was produced by Summit Entertainment, and the screenplay was written by Melissa Rosenberg, and she did an adaptation of the novel for the movie. I thought it was kind of interesting to know that she also wrote screenplays for the original Step Up movie, episodes of Dexter, and Jessica Jones. So I just thought it was kind of interesting to see where Twilight fit in with all of those things as well. Obviously, unless you're unaware, it stars Kristen Stewart, Robert Pattinson, Taylor Lautner.
Bella! Where the hell have you been, Loca?
The Unholy Trinity, I don't know what you would like to call them. The first Twilight movie grossed over $393 million worldwide. And as Ryan mentioned, in its opening weekend, its gross was the highest ever of a female-directed film, surpassing a movie called Deep Impact, which I've never heard of before, actually, which came out in 1998. It was released on DVD on March 21st, 2009, and became the most purchased DVD of that year. And based on 219 reviews collected by Rotten Tomatoes, the film has a rating of 49% and a weighted average score of 5.41 out of 10. It won many awards, including MTV Movie Awards and Teen Choice Awards. So I guess to go from there, as we typically do, we can talk just like a little bit of our history of Twilight, but we're definitely going to get into that more later in the podcast. But Ryan and I both read the books like pretty much after they came out. I think I read the first book in 2006 or 2007. I believe I was in the 7th grade, so 2006 or 2007. And was very much into the fandom of Twilight.
Yeah, no, you definitely were. And Savanah told me that I really wouldn't get the books very much. You know, they're very deep and hard to understand. So I read them, I mean, I think that same year. How could I not, right? Like, it blew up, like, in a way that I don't think a lot of people anticipated. And was unprecedented, really. It kind of paved the way for modern YA and now new adult today.
Twilight definitely had a very huge impact on my life, I feel like. But again, I think that we can kind of get more into that a little bit later when we talk about the legacy of Twilight. But so the first thing that I would kind of like to talk about that I actually hadn't thought about until doing research for this podcast was kind of fitting Twilight in with the other movies that this director has made, which I'm kind of curious to know, Ryan, if you are aware of other movies that this director has made, like in general. Are you or no?
Let me see here. I am not super familiar with the other films besides Red Riding Hood.
Yeah. So she
But now I'm getting conflated. I'm conflating Red Riding Hood with Snow White and the Huntsman, which I know is not the same film at all, and there's like a whole thing behind that one, right? But yeah, no, I'm not super familiar with any of those films.
Yeah, so she directed the movie 13, The Nativity Story, Red Riding Hood, and I've seen all of those movies, and I think it's interesting to kind of see how they're similar, specifically 13 and The Nativity Story. So 13 came out in 2003, and it's a coming-of-age story starring Evan Rachel Wood, Vanessa Hudgens, and Nikki Reed. And Nikki Reed plays Rosalie, actually, in the Twilight franchise. But what was really interesting about the movie 13 was that it, was co-written, actually, with Nikki Reed also when she was a teenager. So, yeah, so it, has that perspective. But basically, to sum up the movie, if you haven't seen it, Evan Rachel Wood is kind of like a good girl, and then she meets Nikki Reed, and then gets her into drugs and partying and stuff, and it's oh god, they're being girls and they're wild now and they're only 13, and what are we gonna do? But it's a pretty good movie. But so just imagine your typical coming of age starting high school kind of a movie. And then the Nativity Story is the Nativity Story from the Bible. And it came out in 2006, and it stars Keisha Castle Hughes and Oscar Isaac, which I did not realize it was him in that movie. I don't know if you've seen that movie, Ryan, but I've seen it often. I remember I saw it in the theater, and one of my friends, shout out friend who listens to this podcast, if you remember, her church group went to it, or her church rented out a theater, and I went with her her church to see it. But Oscar Isaac plays Joseph in the Nativity Story, and when I read that, I was like, oh my god, it was Oscar Isaac. But anyways, it's the Nativity Story, and it was also interesting, co-produced by Wick Godfrey, who also produced Twilight again. And when Harwick decided to direct the Nativity Story, she specifically dramatized it and put it in the context of Mary and Joseph being contemporary teenagers. So I just think it's kind of interesting to line up Twilight as also a coming of age tale around a young girl as compared to 13 and the Nativity Story, which I would consider a coming of age story, and how it kind of just fits in with that and has similar themes. I don't know. How would you, if I told you, Ryan, that I'm comparing the Nativity Story with Twilight, how do you feel about that? Do you have any thoughts?
I don't think I have any thoughts about that. I mean, the Nativity Story is contextualized in a young adult setting. I think you compare any kind of young adult stuff to other young adult stuff. So I don't know. I think you're a little bit off in that there, but I mean, no one can deny that Twilight and religion are combined. You know, they are inseparable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more so thinking about, I guess, the themes of being a young girl, being confronted with like choices that you have to make that are potentially like life altering, or feeling like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, whether that be Jesus or like having to defend yourself from vampires. I don't know. To me, it just feels like there's like a lot of crossover, and I just thought it was interesting to really realize how this was like Harwick's whole thing. Like, most of her movies are coming of age stories of young women, and how that too just relates how like Twilight has been treated, I guess, as a franchise over the years, and been disregarded as being like a story about and by women, and particularly young women, and how it's something enjoyed by young women that is put down upon because of that.
Yeah, I feel like there should be a word for that. Do you think there is a word for that? I don't know. It happens so often, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. If you know a word from it, or what that means, please leave it as a comment down below to educate us, because we would like to know.
But yeah, I think that it's perfectly appropriate to contextualize Twilight as a coming of age story.
So I just wanted to throw that out there because I thought it was interesting. But I'm kind of moving on from that. Another thing that I hadn't, like, obviously I had thought about this, but I hadn't thought about it more so until I saw an Instagram post recently, but that is the like representation of Native American culture in Twilight.
Wow, what a tonal shift.
Yeah, we're moving on to something else now. Which obviously I feel like pretty early on, or not early on, I don't know, like years ago at this point, was able to recognize that the depiction of Native Americans as being compared to werewolves, how that's damaging. And Twilight's not.
How early on would you say? Because I wasn't able to recognize it for quite a while.
Well, that's why.
Are you giving yourself more credit than you deserve right now?
No, that's why I readjusted and said like a few years ago. I mean, I feel like Twilight, I don't know, at this point, has Twilight been more of my life than not? To say early on. Because to say early on could have meant when I was like 13. But I think when I was thinking early on, I was still thinking maybe just like 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Yeah.
In my early 20s is what I'm talking about. And recognizing that, like, comparing Native American people to werewolves, whereas like European people as being vampires, and vampires being like refined and sophisticated, and werewolves being like more wild and things like that. And again, Twilight isn't really unique in that. There's other stories that make that same comparison. And I was aware of this, but I saw an Instagram post literally like 2 weeks ago, I think, that I thought was really interesting, of things that I hadn't thought about at all before. But this Instagram post was made purely because of how Twilight is having a resurgence right now. But it was talking about how the Quileute tribe, that is like the tribe that's in Twilight, they've never received any type of financial compensation for like the use of their tribe, anything like that, apart from like there has been some tourism that the reservation has gotten because of people flocking there because of Twilight to go to like La Push Beach and things like that, but they've never been compensated from Stephenie Meyer for like any of the references that she's made to them, and nor were they ever had like their permission asked to do that as well. And
yeah. It doesn't really make any sense that they haven't been officially compensated yet. But I do, obviously I don't know for a fact, I just know what I've seen in interviews, that it's quite mixed among like the Quileute community as to whether they are fond of the depiction or not fond of the depiction. And of course it's not for us to decide, and I don't know. But it does seem divisive in the community itself, and that's not defending it at all. I think obviously there would have been a much better way to go about it. But hindsight, you know, and it was a different time, and I don't think anyone really was critical of it probably at the time besides the Native American community.
Yeah, I mean, I did some digging and I saw some articles pop up about like Taylor Lautner being chosen. And at the time, I think around like when New Moon came out, that was when there was some critical response of like, hey, Taylor Lautner isn't like a registered tribe member of a Native American tribe in the US or in North America. Why is he playing this character? Which then led to some kind of strange sequencing of events where Taylor Lautner, I guess, found out that he did have like a very, very, very small percentage of Native American in him, ethnicity in him, which then like the PR team really ran with up with like New Moon coming out, which did, it seems like, lead to some critical response at the time of being like, okay, there's a difference between being distantly Native American to being like culturally in that right now. But that's the only discourse that I saw like around that time period when it came out.
I don't really think they thought ahead, honestly, with casting. They set up the film for a sequel, but I don't think they really anticipated having to show off the Quileute tribe as much as they did. Because it's weird because they casted Sam and Leah and all like the named characters in the Quileute tribe in the books. They cast Native people. So I don't know. It's just, they did some parts really well. They did some parts not great. And I mean, the legacy is quite messy when it comes to that side of things and representation.
Yeah, which is also kind of interesting because back to the nativity story. I did read that Harwick like really wanted to cast like Middle Eastern, I'm using air quotes right now, Middle Eastern people to play the main characters, but she wasn't able to for whatever reason. So like the woman who plays Mary, I believe she's has like Aboriginal ancestry, and I'm not exactly sure what Oscar Isaac is. I think he's Latinx, but not Middle Eastern. Anyways, but it was important to her to do that with the nativity story, even though it didn't really happen. So I wonder what like went down with Twilight. Like, was it just like a Taylor Lautner is sort of known from Shark Boy and Lava Girl, so we'll have him in here. I don't know. It was just kind of interesting to me to kind of read about that. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out was in this same Instagram post that I was reading was saying how they did not like, and people have been critical of how Stephenie Meyer used like treaties as a plot device in Twilight, and how treaties, I think this is what it was implying to me, can be like a source of trauma within those communities. So that was just another thing that was interesting to me to think about now that I hadn't ever thought about before.
Yeah, no, I haven't thought about that one in particular either. But that makes total sense to me. Yeah, weird legacy.
Yeah, and on that, we will leave a link down below to donate to the Quileute tribe if you feel so inclined.
I'm very familiar with that link. I've donated before. I've watched so many videos on Twilight, and they all link to that same link.
Well, we will join them in that.
I guess it'd be appropriate to talk about the Twilight Renaissance. And Savanah, I sent you a video by Zara Zed, who's kind of a popular leftist YouTuber. And she did like a whole hour-and-a-half video on Twilight. I'm just curious, did you watch that?
No, I didn't watch it.
That's okay. Anyway, she had a whole bit about it in the beginning that I thought was kind of genius. And it was about these monkeys who were either like had an option to either like be with a sock puppet or be with like a cold bottle. And most of the monkeys over time chose to be with the sock puppet over the thing that provided sustenance but was like cold and hard. So people in times of stress and trauma choose the soft, comfy thing over the thing that's more nourishing. And I think that's just a perfect analog and a genius analog to describe why the Twilight Renaissance is happening.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense to me. My thought more so about the Twilight Renaissance would be, I think that is probably part of it. I also have thought about, like, how many people who were younger, like, either A, didn't see Twilight before, like Gen Z, I guess, like people slightly younger than us, like, had they not seen Twilight before, or were they, like, too young to kind of, like, get it, as I told Ryan. Apparently at one point in time, for the record, I have no memory of that. I only remember doing that with Aragon and Looking for Alaska, so... And one of those you said I was right, so...
Pain points.
Anyways, that's kind of also what I've thought about, maybe why it's been having a resurgence right now, along with, like, Midnight Sun coming out, and obviously then the big kicker, all the movies being put on Netflix. But I kind of think it's probably a multi-reason, but definitely the comfort's there. Twilight's definitely my comfort movie, or one of my comfort movies.
The day I quit my insurance job, I watched Twilight. Like, during the middle of the pandemic, I'd had enough, and I just quit my, well-paying, stable job to go to unemployment by choice, and I watched Twilight, and it made me feel better.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've definitely watched it anytime there's been, like, a breakup or a sad time in my life. I'm like, yep, this is the cozy blanket that I need right now.
Yeah. But I know it's been added to Netflix, but it was on Amazon Prime, like, long before it was on Netflix, so I'm not really sure. I mean, I know, like, the Netflix effect is a thing, but it's, like, been around and available. It's not like, I don't know, Enchanted, where you can't watch it anywhere, Savanah. You can't watch it anywhere.
It's not on Disney Plus?
It's not!
That's strange. Yeah, I guess I feel like before, like, you had to be hardcore to watch it on Amazon Prime. Just probably because not as many people have Amazon Prime or aren't looking to watch movies on Amazon Prime. Like, I feel like you gotta be looking to find it there. I mean, it was also on, like, ABC Family or whatever it's called now, Freeform. I feel like they played it on there, like, pretty frequently before, when cable was a thing.
They definitely had marathons and whatnot. But I don't know if you were... I know you weren't, Savanah. I am a long-term fan here, and will continue to give Stephenie Meyer money until she dies, and then probably her estate money until I'm dead, probably. But when Midnight Sun came out, I went to the bookstore, Barnes & Noble. Unfortunately, I could not support my local Changing Hands at the time because Barnes & Noble is really close to me. Anyways, I walked in, and I looked for it everywhere. It was not there. It wasn't even really advertised, but I went to the front, and they were like, "Oh, did you pre-order a copy?" And I'm like, "No." They're like, "They were sold out in minutes, and if you don't pre-order a copy, you won't have it." I mean, we had girls here with their Edward cutouts just in line getting their books, like, yesterday. You were 2 days late. I was 2 days late. I was 2 days after the release of Twilight, and I called 3 other Barnes & Nobles, Bookmans, and no one had Midnight Sun, and that was in 2020. So, I mean, I think Twilight has been just a constant, really. I understand Twilight Renaissance is having kind of a moment, but I think it's been just still a constant and still popular, even before this Renaissance.
I agree. I have to ask, did you go to the Barnes & Noble that we went to, like, the Twilight party at?
I guess I did. Was that the one in Dana Park?
Yes.
No. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Ryan and I went to, like, a release party with my same friend that I have referenced earlier, for the release of Breaking Dawn, at, like, a midnight release, and there was, like, stuff happening in the Barnes & Noble. Like, we were just there for hours. My poor mother was, I think, just, like, sitting in the Starbucks the whole time, even though she also read the Twilight books, so she probably didn't mind too much being there. But I would agree. I mean, I think back to, like, my Tumblr days, like, everyone I knew at that time was still like unironically posting gifs from Twilight. I think anybody I know who like genuinely liked it never really stopped liking it. I know people have become more like critical of it, just like I think I have and probably you have, like as you've gotten older and learned more about different things, like you probably have seen it from like a different lens than you saw it when you were 13 years old. But I don't think most people like stopped liking it even once they had these critical views of it.
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't think so. I do think I saw a lot. I think you have your timeline mixed up, Savanah. Did we live through alternate realities? Because I remember a stage and period of time where I feel like you kind of disavowed Twilight, or at least kind of didn't really talk about it as much, or you just didn't care. You tried to come off as more just indifferent, I suppose. I don't think you continued to endorse Twilight through all of your years, Savanah.
I think it's multi-reasoned. I was thinking about this yesterday. So part of it was I really loved the books, and I was consistently disappointed by the movies not living up to the books in the way that I wanted them to. So that led me to not want to see the movies, which led to me never watching Eclipse until 2 days ago, Ryan. I finally watched Eclipse. Prior to this, I had skipped Eclipse, the movie, because at that point I was like, I've had it. And then I went and jumped to Breaking Dawn when it came out. But I went back and watched Eclipse a couple of days ago, which I will say, I'm sad that I like didn't see that when it came out, just because I feel like that one is just like the spiciest in the drama. Like I've definitely seen clips of it like over the years, but I hadn't sat down and watched the whole thing. So I was a little disappointed that I waited so long. But so part of the reason why I stopped with Twilight was because I was disappointed in the movies. And then by the time I think that like Eclipse had come out was when I was starting to like dive into pretentiousness in high school and not wanting to partake in things that were like quote unquote lowbrow at the time. And also I think that I started to be more into like, I don't even know what to call this, like social justice Tumblr philosophy earlier than probably you did, Ryan. And so
yeah, for sure. And that's why I'm saying, you said you remember people on Tumblr posting in support of Twilight, but I remember people on Tumblr posting in vitriol against Twilight.
I recall both. I definitely recall both. Because you know what I think it is? Like, I don't know. I mean, obviously I can't speak for strangers on the internet that I literally don't know. But as much like discourse I would see about how like Twilight can be seen as being pro-life. Twilight enforces like gender roles. Twilight enforces like bad relationships, unhealthy relationships, and the list could go on and on. I would still see like the gifs of like Edward and Bella swimming under the moonlight, you know? Like I feel like I saw a good amount of like probably the same amount of both of those things.
Good to know, because I feel like when I got into the what all those people think of us out there as SJWs and feminazis, when I got into that side of Tumblr, I do feel that at least in the period from, I'd say, 2014 to maybe 2016, people were kind of uncritical of their hate towards Twilight, and it was just kind of only seeing the bad and not recognizing that it's a work of cathartic fiction. You know?
Yeah. I think I'm trying to think about when it was that I really started to feel again like comforted by it. I feel like it was probably like 2015. Maybe 2015 was when I started like rewatching the movies again for fun, which honestly I feel like is because of your mom. Because your mom would just like play them every single time they were on TV, just like every Sunday. So I feel like that I just started rewatching them again at that point. But I was like selective, like, because obviously I have a ranking of which ones are my favorites. So I would just watch the ones that are my favorites more frequently. And I feel like when the last movie came out, like, it was just so like over the top that people couldn't like deny that they enjoyed that when they saw it.
No spoilers here, of course. None whatsoever.
That was one of my, I just want to say that was like one of my favorite theater experiences, like, of seeing a movie in the movie theater, was watching Breaking Dawn Part 2.
Hands down, for sure. No one cares about when Dobby said, "I am a free elf," you know, and the chandelier comes crashing. No one cares about that moment anymore. No one cares.
No.
Harry Potter is out.
Yes.
It's weird to me how Gen Z has like taken on Twilight, and they're like, you know, kind of supporting it, but Gen Z like is actively rejecting Harry Potter in a lot of ways. Obviously they're accepting it in a lot of ways. This is a whole nother topic. It's just something that I've been thinking about and grappling with. Anyways, one thing that I really
hang on. Before you do that point, I do just want to say, like, I saw a post yesterday, I think, where it was like, Gen Z loves Twilight and millennials love Harry Potter. And I did have a moment of like, Gen Z, you cannot take Twilight away from the millennials. Like, I don't know where you think we were in the timeline of things. Like, I don't know. It was just wild to me to see that. Sorry, but continue with what you were going to say.
Yeah, no, it is wild to me. Anywho, one thing that did flop, and really I feel like no one talks about at all, is the gender bent version of Twilight.
What are you referring to?
What? See? Exactly. Okay, so in I want to say 2017, 2016, can't remember. I think I was in my junior year in college. Stephenie Meyer came out with like a 20-year, it would have been 20 years at that point, or would it have been 10? I don't know. Some big number anniversary edition of Twilight that had Twilight in it, but also had a gender swapped version of Twilight in the book. So Bella was Beau, and Edward was Edwina? No, that's not right.
Wait, no, this is coming back to me now. This is coming out of the recesses of my memory.
Yeah, I literally cannot remember. I read the thing, and I couldn't tell you what Edward's gender swap name was. It was not Edwina, though.
Thank God.
And Stephenie Meyer just wrote it to prove that Twilight has nothing to do with gender. The same story could unfold. And that was kind of her entire bit for it. And everyone just wanted Midnight Sun. That's all we've ever wanted was Midnight Sun. And it did finally happen. But yeah, no one talks about that. And I think it's for a good reason. It's the same story, just different names.
So it was not successful in trying to prove that it didn't have to do with gender.
Yeah, I don't think it was, especially because at the end, and this is spoilers, so skip ahead, I don't know, 10 seconds or so, 20 seconds, who knows? At the end, Beau gets turned into a vampire.
Interesting. So it's not even the same story then. They changed it.
They did change it. They did. And Charlie's not the same, I would say. Like, Charlie's still kind of protective over the gender swap, like, male version of Bella. But, like, not as I don't know. It was kind of a bland take. Like, it was just, like, a statement that didn't need to be made. And sure, the statement worked for what she was trying to say. It was the same story, kind of, but not really.
Interesting. Yeah, I recall, I did not read it. I don't remember why I didn't read it. Maybe because that was when I was in my anti-Twilight time. I'm not sure.
Not very many people, I think, read it.
Back to the Gen Z thing with Twilight. I discovered something kind of interesting recently regarding Twilight core, the like fashion trend of bringing back the fashions of Twilight and that era. And I watched a pretty good video about it by Modern Girls where it was talking about both like a fashion resurgence of Twilight and Vampire Diaries, which I haven't seen Vampire Diaries, but from what I could see in the pictures, they looked kind of similar, and now I've somehow have started getting like reels on Instagram promoted to me that are also the same Twilight core fashion. And I just feel like old, I guess, seeing this, like, because it's just so strange to me to see these like young teenagers like being like, this is vintage. And it's just like flare jeans with like a Henley top from like, I don't know, Abercrombie, and it just feels like so weird. And I just also feel like that fashion was not even that interesting. Like, I still just feel like that's what a lot of people who are just like normal, who like aren't as interested in, I guess, like adapting their fashion, like still wear clothes like that today. So it just is like so bizarre to me that it's like a thing for people to wear Twilight core.
Yeah, it is really bizarre. And it's weird to me, I watched that same video as you, that it was lumped in with the Vampire Diaries, because I feel like Bella's attire is a lot different, at least in my mind, than some of the early 2000s teen fantasy looks, you know, because I personally associate Bella more with like the flannels and jeans looked, and that just seems kind of like a timeless look to me. But I will say, the one thing that I always wanted to have as a child, and I don't know where it stemmed from, I don't even know if it came from Twilight, but it's just like a pendant that like I always wear, and it's my iconic pendant from something that's meaningful. Something. I don't know what. But that's what I want, and I'm really glad that other girls feel that way too.
I hope that someone is listening who can get you that for Christmas or one of your birthdays eventually. Yeah, I feel like what was really interesting to me in that YouTube video that I watched was it talked about how Twilight, along with like other similar things at the time, also all of the female protagonists were like incredibly thin and like kind of wafy, and how that like contributed to this aesthetic. And I remember being like 13 years old and reading these kinds of characters, seeing these kinds of characters in movies, and always feeling like really frustrated of feeling like I was never gonna look like those people, and then feeling like, well, I'm never gonna get to be the main character. I guess, since I'm not like super skinny and wearing this like, I don't know, just having this very like specific look that is very like, I don't know, I don't even know what to call that look, but and just feeling very frustrated that I never would fit in that with like my hair or my body type, and how that made me sad. Like, I feel like that really made me sad when I was young.
Yeah, I never really had that perspective, I suppose. I don't know, people that I see that are just like ultra thin and ultra beautiful like don't even feel like real people to me, and like in my mind it's not even like, at least this is what I tell myself. I know it's not true, and I know that representation matters and all shapes and sizes and diversity is positive and people like to see themselves represented, but like in my lizard brain, the people on screen like aren't real and aren't representative of reality, and that's always kind of been my mantra when I was younger. Now I think I'm a little bit more affected by beauty standards, but back in the day I was like, oh, I'll grow into myself, you know. There's hope.
I'm really glad that you had that perspective for yourself, because I did not. I feel like I just always felt like, I feel like I really bought into like Bella's just the girl next door, you know, thing when I was reading it. And then even seeing like Kristen Stewart being like, well, I'm never going to have someone like Edward love me because I don't look like that. And really taking that to heart. Like, I feel like that really like me up for a while, like in my life. And so that just makes me even more like kind of sad, I guess, to see like this aesthetic creeping back in. And it wasn't just like Twilight or YA stuff at that time. Like I feel like also like kind of like the emo culture that I was into also promoted like a very similar aesthetic. And so I just had that coming from like a lot of sources, but I hope that that isn't like coming back in that same way, I guess, with this resurgence.
Yeah, me too. And I mean, it seems very niche. And I think there's something with any kind of body type that's trendy. I mean, the BBL body type right now, you have very close to matching, Savanah. So you've achieved beauty standards.
I know. I just wish it would have happened sooner, like for my brain purposes. But we can move on from that. I can discuss that more in my own personal therapy.
I mean, I feel like we have to talk about. I mean, I just feel like I have so many memories that surround Twilight. I remember going to 2 separate Twilight themed birthday parties and a girl having posters on her wall full of tally marks, and that's how many times she'd read each book, or just like what people would do for the sake of Twilight. I mean, even me, I still credit to this day the happiest moment of my life to the Twilight franchise. Once when I found out that Midnight Sun leaked and I got to read a bit of it, and 2, in Breaking Dawn, when Bella and Edward get their little cottage house together, there's something about it made me just so elated. I ran out and I jumped in the living room and I went back and I read. And I just think about it, and I haven't really felt joy since then, Savanah. Not on that level.
Yeah, I really wish of all my school projects, I would have kept this one. In the 7th grade, I remember I did like a book report on Twilight. I'm pretty sure it was Twilight. It could have been New Moon. But it was like I had to make a poster board that explained like the plot of a movie that had like it was like a mountain, and you had to show like what was the intro setting, what was the climax, blah blah blah. And I made my poster board like red and black, like in the theme of Twilight. There was ribbons on it. Like I really wish I still had that. And I remember even feeling like at that time, like I was like, I'm like on the cutting edge right now of doing my presentation on Twilight. Like these people don't even know like what they're about to like hear about in this presentation. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like other very distinct memories. I feel like it was just like I remember a memory. Actually, funnily enough, so I remember when Twilight came out, that was like when podcasts, I feel like, were kind of starting to become a thing. And I was starting to listen to podcasts on like Apple Podcasts. And at the time, there was a lot of like video podcasts, and there was a Twilight video podcast that I started watching. And I wish I knew what these people were doing today so we could shout them out. But they had like a live stream also that they did of their podcast, which I feel like was kind of like unique for like, I don't know, 2007 to be doing that. But I would watch their live streams like every weekend of their Twilight podcast. And that was like the only time that I've ever engaged in being like a troll on the internet. Like, I don't know what like provoked me to do this as like a 13-year-old, but I would be like in their chat while they were live streaming, like talking to like their moderator and convincing their moderator to prank call them while they were doing their live stream and pretend to be like Jacob. I don't even know what was going on in my brain to lead me to do that. But that's a Twilight memory. I feel like I made many dedicated playlists to Twilight at the time. I was very active in like YouTube comments on Twilight related videos. That was I hope that there's not record of a lot of those things out there on the internet.
Yeah, they probably were all claimed for copyright by this point, I would say. So you're probably safe. And of course, Breaking Dawn Part 2 in the theaters with our high school group, because we got to go see it with our high school, some members of it. Just iconic moment. Iconic. Again, one of the greatest twists in cinematic history. Please, if you have not seen it, go see it.
It was so great. Like, I feel like, yeah, like, I can count on my hand maybe the amount of times I've been in a theater with that much, like, visceral reactions from the audience. Yeah, just great times. And like I said, the premiere parties that we went to, and yeah, making t-shirts for like the movies. There was a lot going on in the DIY space for Twilight.
And so, Savanah, I continued my vampire journey. I've read many vampire young adult novels and other paranormal romances of that type that are clearly inspired from Twilight. But I guess, I don't know, I didn't know you were part of this fan group for watching this live podcast, so I'm just waiting to hear other hidden gems about you. Did you kind of get into any other paranormal romances?
I don't recall paranormal romances. There was another vampire franchise that I started reading. Now I cannot remember the name of it. You might have read it too, Ryan.
It's like
the guy,
with Vladimir. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Man. I read like 6 of those books, but I could not tell you. What it was called. The main character was named Vladimir.
Yeah, that's, I feel like, the only one that I specifically remember. I feel like after Twilight was when I started reading, well, no, because at that same time, oh, wait, no, never mind, take that back. Yeah, I feel like after Twilight was when I started to read more, like, what do they call it? Not, like, realistic fiction. Like, I feel like I started to read more realistic fiction books at the time. So that might have been like the last major one that I read, honestly.
Wow, even to this day?
I think so. I mean, I feel like I'm reading a magical realism book right now. Which I do like magical realism books.
Realism is, I can count on my hands the number of magical realism books I've read and enjoyed. They're also like, I don't know, they kind of have like a boring vibe about them where they try to take themselves really serious. I don't know. There's some great ones out there. Obviously, if you like it, you're into it. That's fine. But I just feel like they're kind of rare for me to like them.
Well, so Ryan, are there any like standouts for you that came out after Twilight that were like notably good or notably bad?
Yeah, I will say I read through Vampire Academy, which there was a movie about it, and that movie is kind of a gem, kind of not a gem, and they're making I think an Apple TV show now. They're trying to reboot it. I read like 3 Vampire Diaries books, but I got really into the show, so I watched all of Vampire Diaries with my mother. My mother's also loves vampires. That's another thing. My mom just naturally loves vampires, so it just kind of made sense for me. I'm currently reading right now Crave by Tracy Wolff, and it feels like the most hyper-aware knockoff Twilight book that is engaging in all the tropes of Twilight, but in an respectful, and they're just embracing them. They're just holding them close, like, for comfort and letting me feel in the comfort. So it starts out with a young girl whose parents have died, which I know in Twilight her parents are both alive, which is rare for the genre, let me tell you. Vampire Diaries, both parents are died. Anyways, she's on a plane, which is how Twilight opens up, and she goes to a magical school, which not quite on Twilight's level or whatnot, but anyways, main dude, he's a vampire, and you know what he does? He sends her a copy of Twilight as a warning when she doesn't yet know that he's a vampire. Brilliant. I thought it was great. And she watches the Vampire Diaries in the show canonically, like she watches it on Netflix, so it's pretty funny.
Wow, I'm intrigued. I want to read that.
What I think is most fascinating, though, is kind of how young adult is dying and new adult is thriving. Are you familiar with new adult, Savanah?
I am not.
So new adult is kind of the zillennials/millennials who grew up on Twilight and all those paranormal romances that don't really have explicit spiciness to them and are just kind of just like fade to black. And it takes all of the ingredients in your traditional YA paranormal romances, and it just takes it up, it spices it up, and it just is more explicit. And it's not quite branded with normal fantasy books, because normal fantasy books are like, oh, we can't put those there. But it's not like normal romance books, because they're too similar to young adult paranormal romances. It feels like another version of gatekeeping.
Like gatekeeping and like separating it from other fantasy books? Or is that what you mean? Yeah. Well, why do you think that is? Like, because of the main demographic that fantasy novels, like adult fantasy novels, serve? Or
yeah, I mean, the main demographic is men.
Yeah.
That fantasy novels serve. And new adult, pretty much only women read them.
Which I don't think that this would necessarily fit in that category. But there is like the most infamous Twilight knockoff, that is 50 Shades of Grey. And I feel like that cannot not be mentioned as one of the cultural impacts of Twilight.
You know, we were so close. We were so close to not mentioning it.
I feel like we would be just ignoring a unfortunate fact of reality if we did not. But I did actually have another thought, Ryan, of interesting nugget of information about me that you would find interesting, is that I do believe that Twilight did inspire me to attempt to write my own YA fantasy novel, which I do still have some of the early drafts of, which I reread recently, and let me tell you, there was some interesting tidbits in there that I incorporated.
Yeah, I mean, same. I think I have 2 Twilight knockoffs that, I mean, couldn't have gotten. One of them's on Wattpad as we speak. The other one, it might be lost to time, honestly. But yeah, they're there.
So I've been rewatching the Twilight movies, as one does, and I feel like it's really interesting for me to watch them now, because I think the most overwhelming feeling that I have is just like comfort in watching them. And the other feeling that I have is just feeling, I guess, like confused about how I feel, because even though I know watching the movie that like the dynamics that are playing out in these relationships are not healthy, by the end of the movie, I'm still like, you know what? I like Edward and Bella together. There's no problems here. Like, I want to see them work through this. And then I have to take a step back and I'm like, wait, but like all the other things that happened, like, you know now, and your 26-year-old brain are not okay. And yet at the end of every single movie, I'm like, this is so romantic. And then I just feel like confused in those feelings. And I don't know if I don't know if I'm able to get to that point of it feeling like romantic because of the comforting nature of watching the movies. I don't know. Do you have any of those conflicting feelings, Ryan?
I think I used to. I think I've kind of gotten over it. I mean, you watch a piece of media so many times, and I've watched that piece of media so many times, and reread the books on end as well. And it just, I don't know. I've really come to terms with reading romance and just separating myself and just enjoying the tropes for what they are. And I understand fiction reflects reality, and fiction can have an impact, and fiction can be real. But at least for me, it's not a problem. And if I hope that I don't have that problem, I can hope that other people can have that same kind of learned way of thinking.
Yeah. I feel like, I wonder if I was just more impressionable than you when we were kids. I don't know. I feel like you were also probably pretty impressionable, but I feel like I was just so impressionable with the media that I took in, whether that was like how I was saying, like with body image or just with relationships. Like, I feel like there was a lot of movies, like I was just talking about the other day, how like when I watched Juno as a kid, like, I didn't see any problems with, like, Jason Bateman's relationship with...
I still don't understand that. I still don't...
And, like, just other, like, kind of similar things at the time. Like, And I feel like those things really did shape my view of how relationships should be. And it took me a long time to unlearn that kind of stuff. So maybe that's why I have just a really hard time, like, intellectualizing and going back and forth in my head. And at this point, I feel like I'm like, okay, I can just enjoy it. But I still am like, what is wrong with me at the end of watching these movies? I'm like, have I learned nothing? Am I the same as I was when I was young? I don't know.
I don't know. I think it comes with overconsumption. Again, I've read so many romances in my life, and I really just cannot make my brain, like, I think about it in the time, sure. When I was reading Crave, like I mentioned, I was like, how are they going to address the trope of vampires? And, like, is he going to be super old? Like, it seems like a very aware book. Like, how are they going to do that? Or how are they going to do this in another fantasy book, like, with fairies and, like, they're immortal? And that's kind of weird that there is such an age gap and whatnot. But I just take it in stride. I don't know. It's fine. I think it's kind of romantic when there's a 1,000-year-old fairy with a 25-year-old girl, and he's just, like, dead to the world, and she brings life back to him, and he sees the world like he's never seen it before. And I don't know. I'm fine with it. I'm at this point in my life where I can separate it. Okay? Okay, let me live.
I'm letting you live. I'm just saying I have my own problems. If you are in a good place, I'm happy for you. I think it is easier for me to, like, do that when there is, like, fantasy elements. Like, while I did, like, stop reading fantasy, I would say at that time, like, I definitely continued to really enjoy, like, vampire movies and still enjoy vampire movies a lot. And I feel like there is just something, like, undeniably romantic, albeit problematic at times, and just vampire human relationships and age differences and things like that. But I feel like I am able to get over it because they're vampires and they're not real. Maybe they're real, I don't know. But it just is, like, I don't know, easier for me versus watching, I don't know, something else that feels more normal. And I don't know, like, I watched American Beauty for the first time ever, like, a couple weeks ago, and I was just like, what the hell is wrong with people? Like, why is this their favorite movie?
Really creepy. Yeah.
And with that, it was very easy to be like, okay, yeah, this is wrong. But again, I didn't have, like, any kind of sentimental attachment to that movie.
Just to kind of wrap up my feelings and air my feelings with you, Savanah, I try my hardest to not gatekeep any media from anyone enjoying it and being like, oh, you're not really a fan. I'm the real fan. Except with the exception of Harry Potter. I still kind of do that. Anyways, I'm not proud of liking Harry Potter anymore, so it's not really something that I bring up often. But I do have those feelings specifically with Twilight and specifically when it comes to you. And I think it's because when Midnight Sun was posted on there, you were just not excited. And when I called you twice and left you voice messages and you just called me back and you were like, oh, okay, whatever. And it still hurts me to this day.
I don't even remember any of that interaction. So I remember reading it. Like, I do remember reading it online. So obviously,
I know, but I think I talked to you about it
interested.
later and I was like, oh, did you read it? And you were like, yeah, I'm on chapter 2. And I'm like, how did you just not read the whole thing? It's fascinating reading Edward's mind. And you're just like, yeah, maybe I'll finish it. I'm like, you know?
Uh-huh.
You know?
So is what you're saying is that you feel like you're more of the fan than me? Are you trying to gatekeep me out?
I am doing my best to not, but it feels more natural to do that than not, you know?
I feel like, as we've mentioned before, I tend to be the fan first, but you're the fan longer. And I feel like that applies to Twilight. I don't know. When did that come out? When did that happen? Like, what year was that?
I think it came out after the movie. I think it came out before New Moon, the movie came out. So somewhere between Twilight and New Moon, the films.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like at that point, like in high school was when I really stopped reading for pleasure, which I'm still upset about to this day. I blame marching band for the reason why that happened. And so I feel that's probably more than likely why that I had that reaction. But I'm sorry that I did not engage with you in that excitement about Midnight Sun, Ryan. I am sorry that I wounded you so deeply that now you feel the need to exclude me from the community.
I think the only way you can remedy this is if you buy an Edward cutout and put it in your room.
I would. I feel like it would terrify me in the night, truthfully. But I would do it. Maybe
I think that's the only way I can stop feeling this way. Yeah.
Perhaps if maybe we should set a goal and I'll buy one. If we can get a certain amount of subscribers, I will buy an Edward Cullen cutout and put it here in my apartment.
500. It's set.
Okay. If we get to 500 subscribers on YouTube, I will buy a Edward Cullen cutout. So we'll see. Putting it out there into the universe.
Perfect. But yeah, I that pretty much wraps up my thoughts for me. I mean, obviously, I'm constantly thinking about Twilight, so it's just kind of something that I do on the regular.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I really have any final thoughts other than I hope that, like, people who have historically... Oh, wait, I have something I want to say that I just thought of. I was going to say that I hope that at this point, like, people who have historically, like, just not allowed themselves to enjoy it, which I feel like I've definitely done with things. Like, I've not allowed myself to enjoy movies or books or whatever because of I was trying to be pretentious or cool. I don't know. But I hope that people are taking a step back and allowing themselves to enjoy Twilight as it's having this resurgence. But the thing I wanted to bring up was, so I'm in quite a few, like, film Facebook groups. And there was, like, a whole bunch of chaos going on when the new Princess Diana trailer movie is coming out. And how Kristen Stewart is in it, and all of it came back again, Ryan. All of the hate for Kristen Stewart came back onto the internet in the exact same way it did before. And I was just like, wow, some people really have not changed for like 10 years. But, you know, I'm praying for them. I hope that they see the light and they move on.
I hope so, too. I really do.
Yeah, which I think makes Kristen Stewart the perfect person to play Princess Diana. But anyways, we can move on. But yeah, so that about wraps up our Twilight episode, our first episode of season 2. So thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us. We are going to be kind of changing up our Patreon, so we will let you know about that in the future. Make sure to like and subscribe to us here on YouTube. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere else. I guess we're not anywhere else. We're on Stitcher. But thanks for hanging out with us today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Prickly Pear Primas is produced and hosted by Savanah and Rian Martinez. We are a family production, and editing is done by Savanah and Carina Miranda. Animation is by Carina Miranda, and music is by JJ.